Hi, today we are going to discuss about the Spring Webflow framework of the Spring framework. So Spring Webflow basically it is basically typically focuses on managing the flows. We will define multiple flows or states, right? And we want to navigate these flows and states using a Spring Webflow. And Spring Webflow, I work for JP Morgan company for kind of banking project. It is a back-end banking project. So since it is a legacy banking application, they have used a Spring Webflow. They developed an application using a Spring Webflow and Spring framework. They wanted to navigate different states and steps using a flows. So I want to explain this. I mean, most of the companies and teams, they don't use the Spring Webflow. Either they will use the Spring framework with Java, or they will go for a Spring Boot recently. But very few projects, if it is a legacy project, some projects they might use the Spring Webflow for developing application. So today I want to discuss about the Spring Webflow, because since I worked on this framework, I would like to explain this, what is the use of the Spring Webflow. So here you can see the project structure, the controller, service and model, right? And inside deployment descriptor, right, we can define inside WebINF folder, we can define the flows XML. Inside flow.xml there should be a configuration XML file. Inside that XML file will specify all the steps, from which state to which state the flow should happen, how the navigation should happen. You can define the states. So that is why you can see here, initially we are creating a variable where you see where space name equal to form data, and we actually declared a variable for model data, com.example.myweb app.model.my data. So it is a variable, right? It is a reference variable for that particular data model. And then what we are doing, we are initially defining a first state and giving a id as a step 1, and its view is step1.jsp, and transition is on next you should go to the step 2. So when we visit the step 1 and on next, when you click, when you do some operation, you can see here, where is this? See, we define the first step of the flow which displays step 1 JSP. Transition on next to step 2, when the event name next occurs, example button click, the flow transition to the step 2 state. So we are just defining the states, how the flow should move from one page to another page. We are explicitly defining that in XML configuration, right? We are not doing it inside the inside JSP, but rather we are doing it inside a XML file, the flow.xml file. So why we need a Spring Webflow? Because whenever I want to centralize, I want to see the complete flow structure of application, I can see that in a single configuration file. I don't need to go to multiple pages and all, how the flow happens. So that way I can see all these from one JSP to another JSP, one state to another state, how this can move and all we can see. So you can see here, if we take a more complex application, we may have multiple action states, subflows, decision states, various scopes for data management. If it is a complex application, as I told you, if you take a banking application, it may involve multiple substates, right? Action state, subflows, internal subflows, and also decisions. Sometimes you have to take a decision. So each and everything you can represent inside the flow.xml file. You can give any name for the flow.xml file. You can define the steps, right? And you can define the views, and based on these action states, based on the decision states, based on the subflows, you can define the flows and all. So that's how the Spring Webflow would be so useful. Let me type how um, Spring Webflow versus uh, just a Spring MVC. We'll just see the difference here. See, you can see here, Spring MVC is for built on model view control design patterns. Generally functionality handles the individual HTTP requests and responses, mapping URLs to controller methods. We generally specify inside the controller, we will render the model to particular view. If you take a Spring MVC, right? We do that in when we are designing a Spring MVC. Spring Webflow, you see, built on top of Spring MVC, provides implementation of Spring Webflow state mission. It is a kind of state mission. The perfect name for Spring Webflow is nothing but a state mission, because an application may have different states, and we want to navigate from one state to another state, and we want to represent those multiple complex states and multiple flows between different states. Then we need the Spring Webflow. So, and it encapsulates the multi-step stateful user interactions that span multiple HTTP requests. It manages the state and navigation within the flows. You can see stateful user interactions. So in those scenarios, we need this. And the scope here, the scope is very important. Designed for controlled navigation and business tasks that involve sequence of steps. Right? The scope, it is basically designed for controlled navigation. The navigation should be controlled. If you take a very complex big application which may have multiple states or substates and subflows, you want to define a very complex sequence of steps. Then if you use a MVC, right, sometimes it would become a complex. Then most of the people they'll choose Spring Webflow for handling that kind of scenarios like shopping cart checkout, online registration, loan application, any multi-page widget where user progress needs to be tracked and managed. You got it, right? The Spring Webflow is a very good option if you want to use it. Of course, you can also use the Spring MVC, but for complexity, Spring Webflow adds layer of abstraction and configuration, making it suitable for complex, multi-step process, but potentially adding overhead for simple independent pages. Okay. So Spring, see when to use which. So you can see used for general purpose web development, single page interactions, and building a RESTful service. MVC, Spring MVC, if it is a general purpose application, single page interactions, you can use it. But Spring Webflow, as I told you, when you need to model a complex multi-step workflows and multiple states, with controlled navigation and state management, it can be used alongside with the Spring MVC. Yes, we can along with the Spring MVC, we can use the Spring Webflow. Why do we need the Spring Webflow? Just for defining all the flows steps inside a single configuration file, right? That is why we need it. That's how we can use the Spring Webflow. I worked for one of the projects in JP Morgan Chase company. They developed a pretty good application using Spring Webflow long back itself. So thank you.